Howdy. I'm going to pick up where I left off on the ethics. I realize my videos get a little long. I've been told they shouldn't be that long, that students don't keep engaged, but I can't help it. I love this topic. So we were talking about ethics. I'm going to move into this. I'm going to talk about the laws and privacy laws. How do we relate this to risk? Again, you are going to be doing risk assessments, even if you're not explicitly assigned to do this. Everything you do is based on risk in cybersecurity, and that's what I mean. You're going to be assessing the risk. You put your fingers on the keyboard, you see personal data, right? And there's these laws that have to come into effect. You're familiar with some. Ferpa protects your rights. When I was in college many years ago, it was a common practice that the teacher would put your name and your grade on the door, so there was no privacy. Then they put your social security number and grade on the door. I had a Russian professor once, and he put your initials in Russian and your grade on the door, right? Everybody knew everybody's grades, because let's face it, you could pretty much figure out who I was, right? Well, that in 1974 became illegal under Ferpa. Congress said we need to protect the rights of students. Great. I've heard of a Ferpa violation recently, and I'm like, seriously? A student wrote a friend of mine and copied the dean, and my friend responded and copied the dean, but also copied his department head, and the student issued a Ferpa violation complaint. He was asking questions about a grade, he was asking questions about a midterm or something, and my friend said he really didn't see it as a privacy issue, but because my friend thought the right thing to do was to copy his department head, the student saw this as a violation, and yada, 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 you get all this stuff going on. Well, that's your right to Ferpa, right? Then we have HIPAA, and we all hear about this. And by the way, that is misspelled, HIPPA, sorry, HIPAA, I have to fix that. The Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. Few realize that under the Affordable Care Act, aka Obamacare, the fines for violation of HIPAA went up dramatically. And because of that, before the fines were based on an incident. So I compromised 500, 5,000, 50,000 records. The fine was something like 150,000. Hospitals, you do a business case. We'll just pay the fine. Well, under the Affordable Care Act, one aspect of that was to be based on the number of records. And so fines in excess of $1 million were being leveled. The Wiretap Act, CFAA, I've talked a little bit about. I have these bolded. These are criminal. Don't be getting in violation of this. They're civil and criminal. CFAA is very onerous, long prison terms, asset forfeiture, large fines. Then you have presidential executive orders and PPDs. You have the Computer Information Sharing Act of 2015. And then, as if we were not complicated enough, we had GDPR. So I want to talk a little bit about privacy. You have no constitutional right to privacy, according to Judge Scalia. And if you read the Constitution, the word privacy is never mentioned. In the 1890, Louis Brandeis, future Supreme Court Justice, and Sam Warren wrote a law journal article. They were in a law school, and they wrote a short law journal article, less than 1,000 words, on privacy. And they defined privacy as the right to be let alone. Nothing fancy about that. They created a civil tort for something called the invasion of privacy. And so think about this. Up until 1890, what? Privacy? I don't know what privacy is. And even that, this is a law journal article. And by the way, if you think graduate students can't change the world, these guys were law students. Louis Brandeis later became a Supreme Court justice and was in part of that new wave of privacy. Now, when we talk about privacy, a lot of times people go to the Fourth Amendment. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, so on and so on. You're watching Law and Order, and the policeman says, I'll get a search warrant. And you kind of think like he just goes to like a vending machine, puts a quarter in, gets a search warrant. It's not the way it works. He has to raise his right hand, supported by oath or affirmation, that particularly describes the place to be searched, the persons or things to be seized, and some aspect of probable cause. Now, that's not an evidentiary standard like beyond a reasonable doubt. It's reasonable belief. I reasonably believe that there's drugs being, there's drug dealing going on in this house. Well, support it. Well, the cars come and go, this and that, whatever. And then you have a paper document, a search warrant, before you can go into that. Again, you guys are in such an exciting part of your career. There was a Supreme Court decision in June or July for Carpenter that began to strengthen our Fourth Amendment rights in the electronic age, the Carpenter decision. And, you know, this is going to affect you. So before Carpenter, the biggest cases about privacy had to do with Griswold v. Connecticut. Okay, believe it or not, can married people buy birth control? Used to be illegal in Connecticut. Supreme Court judge says, you know what? You're right. The Constitution doesn't say you have a right to privacy, but it guarantees your right by what's penumbras or emanations of privacy. Penumbras are like shadows. And the First, Fourth, Fifth, 14th Amendment guarantees your right to privacy. And about the same time, the Supreme Court began to say, look, you have a general right to privacy in family and marriage and motherhood and procreation and child rearing. I always say this in law and policy, and it just generates some discussion, and there's a New York Times article on this from last spring. People think Roe v. Wade, you know, was all about legalizing abortion. It was not. The legal analysis and rendering was about the right to privacy, and the consequence legalized abortion. Okay? So Justice Douglas, this begins with Griswold in Connecticut. It goes into the Supreme Court cases for these are particularly here. Also, Katz v. U.S. was a criminal case. So look how you have Griswold v. Connecticut using a basis for Katz v. the United States, and that's where we get our reasonable expectation of privacy. Did you have a reasonable expectation of privacy? If you're doing it in public, no. If you're doing it in your home, yes. Later, we had Lawrence v. Texas, which allowed Lawrence v. Texas. There was a law in Texas against gay coupling, and Lawrence v. Texas said, no, that's a right to privacy. Okay, but then what went wrong? Kind of on this road, we're understanding privacy, we're kind of happy, we think we know. Well, first of all, we have the internet and social media, and you know, this viral nature of information being disseminated, the cyberbullying, the abuse of power. And then you have these issues again that you need to be kind of like aware of and risk, but you need to take my law and policy class on jurisdiction, on lack of laws, on conflict of laws, on damages. And you realize that technology, you know, gallops along like a racehorse, and law kind of trudges behind like a plow horse, right? Law can never keep up with technology. So now you have that conflict of privacy protection, as I talked about in the GDPR lecture between the US and the EU. So as I said, the law always lags technology. When you look at this legal reaction on this, you have jurisdiction. I have some international students, and they're always kind of confused as how can the United States have 51 sets of law? You know, countries like England, Australia, Canada, they have a unified body of law, even though they have provinces and stuff. Not the US. We have 50 state laws. You know, what might be a misdemeanor in one state's not a crime in another state. It's a felony in another state. Cyberbullying is a good example of this. Some states say, hey, if the kids, you know, it's a certain age and they're in a consensual relationship, it's not, I'm sorry, not cyberbullying, sexting. And another one says you sex somebody and they're underage. Sexting, you know, it's a crime, it's a felony. Others say it's a misdemeanor. You know, we have 50 states, we have no unified body of law. I joke in law and policy that if you're ever going to commit a crime, stop, search the laws. It might be a good idea to, you know, cross a state boundary, right? We have this growing problem with stolen intellectual property. Now, again, how am I bringing this back to risk? A huge part of risk is assessing your compliance and governance requirements. So, this was originally about ethics, and I'm going to close with this. Here's 1992, the Computer Ethics Institute. This was before the internet. Their goal was providing a moral compass for the ocean of information technology, which sounds like completely outdated, right? It's no longer an ocean of information technology. It's a super galaxy or something. It's a tsunami. All of these still stand. I'm not going to read them to you, but they all stand. Thou shalt not snoop around in other people's computer files. They all still stand. They're all great. You're not going to use a computer to steal. You're not going to use a computer to bear false witness. You know, but the issues have changed. The big thing in the 90s was number 6. You know, bootlegging your copies of Office because it was like, you know, $500 or some outrageous price. You know, now it's like comes with your operating system, right? But how do we take this into today's world, internet, super collected, global, geographically dispersed, multicultural, all these different aspects? IEEE, I summarize this. I believe IEEE and ACM both have committees now revisiting this. Same kind of stuff, you know, kind of like live long and prosper, don't lie, cheat, or steal. You know, as a friend of mine used to say, there's never been better laws written than the 10 Commandments. If we just stuck to those, we wouldn't need all the others. Here's our ethics. Here's our ethics. So here's where I want you to get the point. None of these ethic frameworks address cybersecurity's current hot topics. And in my last lecture, I talked a lot about hacking back because that to me is the most salient hot topic right now. We can talk about Facebook's problems keeping data. That's important. We can talk about coming regulations, you know, doing what's right, compromising your trust. But you just get the point. None of these address this because we are living in a time where technology has so superseded where we are in an unethical legal and, not unethical, sorry, uncertain legal and ethical framework. So another one, and I'm sorry if this screen doesn't show you, it'll be on the slides. So what's next? Well, the only thing I can tell you is, again, may you live in exciting times, and we need to address this issue. If you can come after me for giving you bad legal advice, you can come after me because I'm a licensed professional engineer, which is not required. There's less than 100 with a specialty of software in the entire state of Texas with 40,000 registered professional engineers. Why do cyber workers? How do we make this professional ethics standards work? Do we license? I don't know. You know, one of the things NIST says now is you don't need a college degree to do cybersecurity. And a lot of these professional ethics, you got to have your right degrees, and you have to pass some, you know, exam and stuff. But right now, all we know is there is a need for it. So good for you, because as the emerging generation of cyber workers, you get to set those standards. Thank you for your time.